growth is friction. The cost of growth is pain. It's the problems that you endure every day. That's what sustains the growth. The really profound feedback that I got early on from my mentor was, what's your exit? What's your strategy? Have that in mind, because ultimately what a founder's job is to fire themselves from every job until you fire yourself as the founder. Knowing that information, you act differently. If you know that from the start. I was around people that really inspired me, and it was there that I learned what excellence looks like. And what excellence looks like is people are obsessed with what they're doing. Someone's obsession has a really good indication of where they're gonna land, because they're gonna keep going when it's not convenient. I worked at very small companies initially. When I say I was an overworked underachiever, like I mean that by definition. I worked way too hard and was not paid as much as, I deserved to, based off how hard I was working. But I was totally fine with that. I wasn't trying to get paid. I realized that it was the time to learn.
How's your journey with mental health been, and especially in a high-intensity role like being a founder of an agency?
Oof.
Wilian, welcome to Founders and Empanadas, my friend. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing fantastic.
Amazing. Thanks for coming in live for JP Morgan Week in San Francisco. Yeah, last time we connected, it was the day before my martial arts test. I remember I was flying back to Colombia that day, all bruised up. The flight was tougher than the test itself, but so great to reconnect again.
Absolutely. Pleasure's all mine. I remember that. I was a little nervous for you, but everything, it worked out. You look like you're in one piece.
Worked out. All right, let's dig in.
Let's
Salud.
do it. Cheers.
How was it?
Oh, yeah. This is delicious.
Like a little chicken and cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Empanada venezolana. Pick some up on the way.
I love it. This is delicious. Thank you so much. We got a few more there, so I'm going to dig in.
Well, Wilian, today I'd love to dive deeper into everything design, and no one better to bring on than you. So NeoWork actually was worked with Zabal to build our website, neowork.com. And from where it looked like before to where it's at now is a night and day. And I really credit you and your team. Shout out to Raj and all the amazing people behind Zabal for really helping us revamp our branding beyond just our site, really the messaging and design as well.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you for saying that. It's been an absolute pleasure. You make it so easy. And you and the team over at NeoWork have been, when I say exceptional, not just as, you being my customer, but I'm also your customer too now, which I think is kind of unique, right?
Yeah, that's a setup I like to do with founder friends, trading services.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because the way that manifested was quite unique. At least it was for me, because I didn't have intentions of doing that initially. How did you find us? I think you found us through a reference, right? Someone referred you to us through your founder group?
A founder friend from Hampton.
Okay.
Built their site with you and heard great things. And
nice.
I remember still our first discovery call, like us talking like, oh, did you overlap at, where you were working in the tech company with my brother? And, I realized that, okay, this guy's legit. And especially once I first met your team on that first kickoff call, I knew I was in good hands.
That's amazing. Yeah, I vividly remember, because obviously we do deep research on our partners and try to understand the competitive landscape. And it's an interesting time for you in particular. And I'd love to pick your brain about that later. But the way it worked is we were actually on the market trying to find additional talent, because, truly an agency is just the makeup of the team. That's it. And I tell the team that all the time. I'm like, I am nothing without you. We are nothing without each other. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I remember I was looking at your site before we started working together, and I was like, maybe if we knock this out of the park and we can get like a really good working product, then maybe he'll let me use his service. And we locked in and we launched the site, and everything was fantastic, and we built a really strong relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I actually, I use your services. Our executive assistant Catalina, she's from Colombia, and she does fantastic work, super collaborative and sweet.
Shout out Cata. Let's get the shout outs going.
Shout out Cata. Yeah, she's great. Yeah, so thank you for that. It's been a game changer.
And I also just really appreciate how you welcome her into the team, and that's the best way to work with any outsourcing company is to view them no differently than the internal teammates, and just the level of support and guidance you give her is really that's what makes the relationship work. So,
Of course.
yep.
One more thing to piggyback on that, I don't want to forget this, but one of the things that's really interesting about your business model and the way that we operate is that there's an onboarding phase, there's a strategic alignment, and then you meet the people that you're going to be working with, right? It's very common similarities that we see in this type of industry, like that type of workflow. And we see it when we adopt new software, for example. If it's like our HR platform, there's a dedicated customer service that could be like a project manager for me, right? Um, what's really interesting is that I learned a lot about how you guys take this like brand new relationship and say, all right, here are the rules, here's how we're going to work. And you create this, like, let's call it a path of least resistance that then I can just like, all right, I'm hands off. Like everything is pretty much locked in. We have check-ins, I give feedback. So man, kudos to you. And the systems you've put in place are just insane. So I adopted a lot of those and it's been working
I
out.
love it.
Yeah,
I love to hear that, man.
of
Awesome.
course.
So I would really love to start out with by just hearing the founder journey from immigrating to the US from Cuba as a kid and, going on to working at startups acquired by Google and then eventually starting Zabal. Walk us through that journey and maybe lessons learned along the way that kind of helped inform the foundation of what you wanted Zabal to be.
Yeah, I'd love to. Gosh, that's a long story, but I'll try to find the pockets that are worth mentioning, and then we can drill in if you have
Yeah.
any questions. So obviously, you know this about me. Born and raised in Cuba, came to the U.S. when I was about 8, almost 9. When I was younger, and it's interesting. I see this in my daughter. I'll read her a story, and the second time around, she remembers almost word for word, verbatim, like what the book says.
Hmm.
It's very weird. Her memory is obnoxious. And we actually have a game now where she will she asks me to purposefully mess up the book. And then if I make a mistake, she'll say, "No, Daddy, it's this instead of that." And it's become this like memory game for her.
Hmm.
And I remember there's this thing, when I was younger where I would be fascinated by playing with like settings of video games or like try to memorize things as much as I can. Um, which leads perfectly into the type of work I do now because you obviously have to be on your feet and remember all of these like random things about our clients, right? Like your dog's name is Yuri and it's like these little things have an impact. So I try to remember things like you have a, black belt, second degree, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's these little things that I remember realizing about myself. I had similar things where I would read a book and become fascinated by, all right, how can I memorize this? All of this is going to lead into something. I promise this makes sense. The next thing that was really important to me when I was younger was communication, obviously, being able to articulate. I think there's something really powerful about that, especially being a founder. You have to obviously instill stability and trust with your team. But if you're not an excellent communicator, then it doesn't matter, right? If no one's listening and you can't articulate the needs. So growing up, that was sort of my foundation. It was obviously immigrant moving to the US. And then when I started to learn English and everything just kind of opened up for me, I realized that there is order in the US and I had to figure out how it worked. Obviously, every immigrant needs to go to college. This is what they tell you. You go to college, you get a degree, you get a job, all these things. And my plan was I want to learn how to play this game and hopefully win, obviously. But then somewhere along the way, I realized that you don't have to play the game that someone has architected for you. But if you do play that, realize where you're going. And I realized that it wasn't the game that I wanted to win. And so I had to pull back. That's where the whole like founder started. I realized that this is not something I want to get good at. You have to be careful about what you get really good at. because once you do it for long enough, that's how you're recognized. And so I realized that I needed to re-architect my narrative and how I wanted to package myself in the market. So that's like the end goal, like become independent versus having to essentially work for other people. Not in an egotistical way. I tell my team this all the time. If I found a team that I really wanted to work with and we were all aligned, I would do it. I just never did. So I had to create my own rules, my own game, and that's how I got to where I'm at today.
That really resonates with me. I also kind of earlier on in my career working with startups, I love the analogy of like playing on the wrong game or playing on hard mode where I should have just reset my console and
Hmm.
aligned with. I found early on that I struggled being an employee, especially when
Hmm.
working with managers that were going in a direction that I disagreed with,
Hmm.
and that I just needed to instead of play a co-op game, going for a single player where I didn't have that resistance.
Interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
more. When you say resistance, like, are you saying, and again, like this is just open
yeah,
discussion. I agree with you. There were some decisions that I saw that I was like, if I'm going to fall on my sword, I want it to be my sword, not someone else's. Because then you can know, like, hey, I went for it. I guessed publicly and I failed.
mhm,
And that's okay if it's your decision. But if it's someone else enforcing a decision on you that you disagree with, that's tough. Because then you don't have that intuition, gut pull. What was that
exactly.
like for you?
Yeah, biggest thing was I drive so much motivation, personal motivation around seeing something through to fruition that I deeply believe in. And if I think that an idea is misaligned with either my personal values or is going to be wrong for the business, it really is a motivation killer for me.
Hmm.
And maybe what makes us good as founders is a bit of that kind of manic, and at least I'll speak for myself, that manic energy of doing whatever it takes to get to the end mission. And if I don't feel aligned with what that end thing is, I feel like I can't use all of the energy that I have as an entrepreneurial person.
Hmm.
Um,
That makes sense.
so what I really love about the your early days at Zabal is how much you focused on just building your own personal brand, and really becoming well known in communities especially during the earlier Webflow days.
Hmm.
Um, Speak more to that's how you built up your foundation and how that led to first few clients, and maybe what other founders listening in could learn from that story when they're trying to establish their own personal brand.
Start small. That's the first thing. That's my knee jerk reaction. I'm going to try my best to keep doing that throughout this podcast so that it doesn't feel like I premeditated this. Uh, let's start with when I was at university. Um, I don't know what it was, and it wasn't me being defined in any way, right? But after taking a few semesters, I realized that there's this strange disconnect where like business sensitivity isn't part of the curriculum as much as I thought it would be. And that's okay. There's not a problem because now looking back at it, I realized that I had a fantastic foundation laid out for me. And the foundation doesn't change. You have to have that in order to build on top of, and everything else up here you get by working at a company. So I was already like, what are the companies doing? That's a wrong expectation. You know what I mean? I learned a lot about theory and things like that in the design space. Uh, but the interesting thing is that I had that question, like, how does this apply once I graduate? How does this apply? And I wasn't able to get to that. So I was like, okay, let me just keep kicking the can and like empower myself to learn these things and meet with people in different majors, things like that.
Mhm.
That was really helpful. And then once I graduated, I started to work as a designer, like a digital designer. I worked at very small companies initially. And I was like, when I say I was an overworked underachiever, like I mean that by definition. I worked way too hard and was not paid as much as, I deserved to, based off how hard I was working. But I was totally fine with that. I wasn't trying to get paid. I realized that it was the time to learn, So I went to every job thinking, not what am I getting from this client, but who am I becoming as a result of working here? And so every decision was based off that, right? So I started out small, meaning I would take on one project at a time. And then I would be like, okay, I'm practicing this at work. Let me practice it on my own. Like, what does it look like, right? Almost like an Olympic athlete. They, it's naive to assume that they're practicing when the lights come on. They've done that hundreds of thousands of times.
Yep.
So it's like muscle memory. And I realized early on I needed to get to that point. And so when I kept starting out small, it started to get bigger and bigger. Clients would hear about us. And then inevitably what happened was I met a few people early on in my career that were like, hey, how about I don't pay you and you can become like a partial owner? And I thought that was really interesting. So I would take like 3% equity, 20% equity. And none of those companies went anywhere. Surprise. And that's okay though, because I learned so much.
Yeah.
But what I did realize through that process was that I really liked being close to people, the customer, or whoever that is, right? And that's something that I always remembered. So during the day, I was doing product design work, but after hours, I would occasionally take a freelance project here and there. And then once I started to pick up momentum, I realized that, hey, I know enough now where it's almost like I have a moral obligation to share what I'm learning. Because if I don't, then the next generation or someone who is desperately trying to break through is going to give up. And so I remember early on, I hope he's watching this, Chris Doe and I think Jose Caballero, they were doing a podcast together. And I literally gave myself 3 months. I was like, if I can't get a job doing design, I'm going to go into sales. Like, this is going to happen. And then I watched a podcast really late at night. And I just watched these guys pitching and winning these like obnoxious projects. And they had their like freelance and agency. And I was like, wow, you can change your life and the trajectory of your entire family's life doing what they're doing. And I felt so aligned with it. I was like, I got to do this, But how to do it, I had no idea. It wasn't something that I had done before, or I didn't have any mentors. And so that's sort of what happened. Then I started to pick up more clients, and I just had the belief that I could do it, Surely I ended up one client at a time, building enough momentum, and then I built 1 Minute Designer. And I think that was what really fully, like, when you think about escape velocity, I think that's what did it, because you could have the most amazing portfolio or theme park, but if no one goes in it or no one sees it, it doesn't matter. So that was what propelled me. I built a small micro personal brand, 1 Minute Designer, created 1-minute videos for people in the community that had, a specific question. And Webflow caught wind of that. I was talking about Webflow, using Webflow. And that's sort of, what gave me the momentum, if you want to call it that, to keep going.
To then become a top Webflow partner. Your story, there's a lot of parallels I see myself of, early New York projects. I also did the equity in exchange for services approach, and those never worked out, but they were fun. Working with like very early stage founders. I think one lesson learned from that was if a founder is willing to give away 20% this early on for just some outsourced services, maybe they don't have the same conviction in their own products too. But yeah, just kind of like finding those early wins, and that's really validates and kind of self-propels the confidence to go after bigger fish. And you now work with, Fortune 100 companies. And, working on Webflow, it was a no-brainer for a smaller company like mine, but I'm curious with these larger enterprise type deals you work on, if you get a lot of pushback around Webflow's scalability and just resistance from that enterprise level company.
Such a good question. And look, I'm not going to sit here and try to throw other software companies out, throw them under the bus. But one thing I can tell you is that I've never had one client say Webflow is not scalable enough. And when you think about tethering yourself, if you're going to build a business around a tool, you have to make sure that there's this elasticity. So I can work with smaller teams, but I can also work with, the larger enterprise companies, 500 plus employees. And so I seek that. I was looking for something like that versus, attaching myself to some of these earlier, and I'm not going to go and mention them, but some of these tools don't exist anymore for a reason. So for me, as it stands today, I have not had one client say we can't scale because of Webflow.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's great. It's good for you too because you're on the platform.
Yep. And I'm curious too about, maybe earlier stage founders that just feel like, oh, they can build their site themselves on Lovable, and with some prompts, they're good to go. And maybe how do you deal with that pushback? And I guess what's the main differentiators you would say to working with a dedicated agency to build on Webflow versus a DIY AI type product?
For sure. And by the way, I think that a lot of teams could benefit from working with an agency. It becomes like a force multiplier where you don't have to acquire that additional cost internally, 401k, insurance, all that comes along with building, a team. So there's obvious value there. But the one thing I will say is that if you're looking to build on your own, be mindful about what limitations come along with that. I'll give you an example. Over the last, I want to say 6 to 8 months, I've been spending way too much time on these AI tools. An obnoxious, probably 60% of my time goes into it now. Way too much time in Lovable, like you mentioned. And it's come to me, and through trial and error, I realized that, yes, you can build faster. Just because you can does not mean you should, though. Right? So here's how it manifests. I have an idea. I want to go build a website or a product. Great. Do you think like a product manager? Do you know how to articulate the needs of the user? Do you know those underserved needs? Or are you just building something that's cool? If you're building something that's cool, be honest with yourself and know that it's a prototype. Yep. But if you're building something of value and scale, realize that that's not what you're doing. If you're just building something on a weekend and then blasting it and saying, hey, I built this thing in a weekend. It's like, yeah, that's a prototype.
Right.
Yep. And in addition to that, in the same breath, not going to knock Lovable because I'm an avid user. I've spent hundreds of hours, maybe even thousands at this point. And I built, I think, five different products, and we can talk about them in a sec. You still have to QA your own work. You still have to make sure that what you're prompting, even if you use the chat, you have to read it. And so, yes, you can move fast, but that comes at a cost. You still have to spend the time to do the testing and all of that, right? So it's not fully hands-off yet. So that, to anyone that's watching, that's what I would say. It's like, yeah, you can definitely build, no doubt about it. But the time that you would have hired someone else to do it, you are the person that's doing it now.
I saw a great LinkedIn post with a visual of Lovable users where they reach their peak of excitement and then the trough of disappointment of when they have to QA their own products. So I actually have a buddy that started an agency that it's solely around fixing and making scalable early Lovable MVPs.
No way.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So he's done well. But
that's incredible. And by the way, I'll be the first one to say, major round of applause to a lot of these prompting tools. I do think that's an interesting interface for how we should be building natural language, the same way that you would articulate to a person. Here's a fun fact. I use my Vision Pro headset at night, and I'll be laying down in bed. If my kid wakes up and I'll try to put her to sleep, I'll lay in bed, put on the Vision Pro, and I'll prompt. Like, I'm literally laying in bed, prompting and building and just testing out Lovable. It's completely insane.
Yeah,
As
awesome.
I'm doing this, I'm like, who are you? But I've built entire products from 11 p.m. to 1 in the morning just doing that.
I love it.
It's nuts, but that's where we are.
Instead of the Queen's Gambit seeing the chess pieces on the below your bed, you're seeing lovable prompts.
That's right.
Very cool. So I think we should do a little empanada intermission. Have you tried out this one? This one is
let's do it.
pretty amazing, I must say.
What's this? I'll surprise myself.
Yeah, sorpresa.
Ooh, I like this one better.
Right? I thought you would.
That's good. What is this?
I think it's carne molida.
Yeah.
Right?
We should have started with this one.
Man, messed up.
You're good.
Retake.
Right.
Since now starting this podcast, I had the opportunity to interview a couple of first generation founders and second generation, and something that I really admire. And there's stats around most entrepreneurs of tech companies, like more than 50% are first or second generation founders. Is just the first or second generation immigrants. Is just the level of resilience and being able to overcome all of the daily punches to the face and roller coaster ride that is being a founder.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just dive a little bit deeper into your story of coming to the U.S., getting exposed to a completely new culture, and how you think that maybe has served as an advantage to being a founder.
Yeah, gosh, that's so interesting. And it's a really good question, by the way. When I came to the US, obviously, I didn't speak English. I knew how to say like 100 and where's the bathroom. That serves no one except the bathroom part. The interesting part is that when you're that vulnerable, you have no choice but to believe in yourself because you have to survive, right? And so through these, let's call them trials and tribulations of like learning the language, learning a whole new culture, et cetera, I had to learn what it's like to adapt and adapt quickly. And I think I'm pretty sure you would attest to this. It's like a big part of being an entrepreneur is like how quickly can you adapt and realize when you have to pivot or when it's time to double down. And so as I was sort of like evolving and growing as a young kid, I was never that studious, I would say. I didn't really gravitate too much towards like becoming textbook smart. I knew that I was bright, but not in a cocky way. It was more like I don't need to try that hard to pass. But then I realized when I was like 17 or 18 that the information that you acquire is how you view the world. And how you view the world has a big impact on how you act in the world. And so the more information that I was gathering, I was like, ooh, I need to be careful about what I'm absorbing. So then I became super obsessed and I went from like a C, D grade student to, getting a full ride scholarship to the #1 speech and debate team in the nation and got an academic scholarship, all of this within a 2-year timeline. Like it was just a flip of a switch. I was like, this is not it. Right? Because I kind of saw that I was on the wrong path with the information and the people I was around. And so I sort of broke through, for lack of better words, and I was around people that really inspired me. And it was there that I learned what excellence looks like. And what excellence looks like is people are obsessed with what they're doing. And it's just like an unhealthy obsession. And that's like the main thread that I can carry through is like someone's obsession has a really good indication of where they're going to land because they're going to keep going when it's not convenient. And I look for that with family and friends too. Who are the people in your life that are showing up when it's least convenient for them? Not when it's convenient. If it's their day off and they call you at 12, are they showing up for you or is it just convenient? Or are they calling you, because they really care about you? So yeah, the obsession part was so interesting. And so I adopted that. And it's led me to where I'm at today for sure. I definitely think that, but it wouldn't happen without the people that influenced me. An example, and I can go on a rant about this, but it's a framework that I've sort of created for myself over years. I have this mentor, Taylor. He also runs an agency, fantastic human being. He hired me when I was getting started. and I did right by him. It's like working crazy hours, and he was like, "Hey man, you're pretty cool." He gave me a testimonial and everything. And I boldly reached out to him and I said, "Hey, would you mind having like a 30-minute call once a month? Can we do that?" And he was like, graciously, "Yes, let's do it." And through chatting with him, I learned this framework that hopefully it provides value to whoever's watching. So it's problem recognition, problem borrowing, and problem adoption. Let me explain. So when someone thinks about Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, they think the final product. They don't see they don't see what went into it. Rightfully so, they're not at the practice. So it's natural to think that way. But what I learned is that instead of looking at that person shoot a perfect 3, or looking at my mentor making, excess of dollars that I wanted to aspire to make, I realized that was the wrong way of thinking about it. So instead of fantasizing about what they do have, let's think about the problems that they have as a result of these things. One way to explain this is like, let's say you want to live in a 5-bedroom house, 30 acres of land, whatever. Who's going to cut the lawn? Who's going to clean the house? If something breaks, how many light bulbs can break before you lose your mind? Right? So that's what I mean by problem definition. You, instead of fantasizing over what they have, think about the problems that they live day to day to make sure that that life is even possible. Once you identify what those things are, you start to take a really good look at reality. Do I want that life? Right? And if you do, then you start with problem testing or problem, it's like you're basically testing out those problems. So go and cut lawn for free. Find someone that has a big, yard and say, "Hey, I'm going to cut your lawn for free. No strings attached." And then you start doing those things, right? And the last step is problem adoption. After you define it, after you tested it out, you start to think, okay, is this something that I want to adopt? How I applied it to the agency. Early on, we were just doing design and development. It was just me. I realized that if I wanted to scale, I needed to bring on new people. And I knew that that's what my mentor did. So I tested it out. One contractor, part-time, helping me support with the production level work that I did not want to do. And I was like, oh, you know what? This is cool. Because now I have all this time to do sales. Right? And I was like, okay, let me test it out. Brought him on. And eventually I brought him in, 40 hours a week. And that's a way that you can manifest the problem defining, then problem borrowing, and then problem adoption. The adoption phase comes as a result of knowing that this is validated, it's tested, and it's something that you want to acquire for yourself. And I think it's an interesting framework because if you do that and you compound that over time, yes, you acquire the problems of your mentor or someone you aspire to be, but that's where real growth happens. Growth is friction. The cost of growth is pain.
Yep.
Not this fantasy of like, oh, I want this mansion or I want to see, 7 figures in the bank. It's the problems that you endure every day. That's what sustains the growth.
Yep. I listened to a podcast recently that used a analogy of, we seem to glamorize professional athletes, like you mentioned LeBron, of what them practicing X amount of hours and what they're able to attain. But in the workplace, there is a kind of negativity or workaholicism tied to putting too many hours in. But it's the same approach of if you really want to achieve excellence in something and adopt that problem that goes along with reaching the level of excellence, it requires putting in the work.
Yeah, for sure.
Any examples of how you've used that framework maybe for smaller decisions just in your day-to-day personal life?
Day-to-day personal life. I mean, anything. It can be applied to anything. If you think about it, like fitness, you see someone that's in really good shape, ask them, hey, how many times a week do you work out?
Right.
7 days? What? I'd only have time for 1 day. It's like, okay, then don't look at that body or don't look at that,
And no empanadas? What's going on?
I'm still going to eat my empanada, especially this one. This is delicious.
Yeah, this one is a killer.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. if my mom was to have me, I might just save her this little piece. I'm gonna save it here for later, just in case. But no, to answer your question, in all seriousness, it can be applied to business. It can also be applied to being a father, which I take very seriously. And it's like, business aside, like, yes, that's cool, that's sexy. The growth is nice, but that's not what's important. One of my clients, when he found out that I had a kid, um, at the end of a call, he said, "Hey, Will, before you jump off, you stayed an extra 15 minutes on this call." And I was like, "Yeah, so?" I'm thinking that, but I'm not telling him. And he's like, "Just remember, life is behind those doors." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" Because he caught me off guard. I was like, "I feel attacked right now." And he was like, "You have a new kid, and that's what matters. I was not as present when I was a father, and I kick myself. There's always going to be work." And so that's another way that this is manifested, is like, when you see a father having a really good relationship with their kid,
Hmm.
that usually means that they were not absent. You know? So it's like these little, or being a good husband and a good son, etc. It's like putting someone else's needs before yours is usually a problem for some people if you're selfish. It's like, how do you become selfless if you care about that person?
Which, in a way, also serves you long term by having that strong relationship and having that support system as they grow up. And yeah,
That's true. That's true.
sometimes the early on sacrifices end up being the best kind of ROI of your time. So
100%. But yeah, it's a framework that has made a significant impact, and I try to remember it whenever I can.
I love that. I'm gonna steal that one. And something that I'm personally curious to hear more about, because it's something that I struggle with often as a founder,
Hmm.
is taking a step back from your zone of genius or the area you're most interested in. You started off early on very involved in the design and dev work of the projects, and having to now delegate and step back and kind of go from founder mode into CEO mode. I'm curious how you've done that, because I too, I'm an operator at heart, and I love to get into the weeds of the operations, but I know that that's not the most scalable thing for my business. So yeah, any best practices or tips you found for taking a step away from the area that you enjoy doing the most?
Yeah, the really profound feedback that I got early on from my mentor was, "What's your exit? What's your strategy? Have that in mind, because ultimately, what a founder's job is to fire themselves from
Mhm.
every job until you fire yourself as the founder." Knowing that information, you act differently if you know that from the start. Otherwise, like you said, you can get stuck in the operations and the design and the development, and then it becomes, you don't have like a company. You have a career that you've kind of expanded, and it's like this morph of, you're like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and that's not healthy. And we can talk to how that. I don't think it shaved years out of my life, but the stress was quite extensive, and
Mhm.
it leads into mental health, which we can talk about also, unpacking that a little bit. Um, but to get to the root of your question, the hardest part to shed is your identity. What I mean is, I was a designer, I was a Webflow developer. If someone was to ask me, "What do you do for a living?" it was the same thing as, "Who is Wilian?"
Hmm.
There was no difference. What I did and who I was who I am. And when I was put in a position where I had to let go of design, had to let go of development, I ripped the layer that was so tethered to who I am that I forgot who I was
Hmm.
once time passes. And so that's when I became, more of like the CEO by definition. And I realized then that I don't want to ever be super unplugged. I still need to be somewhat of a practitioner, because success has a scent to it. And if you forget what that smell is or taste is, then you won't recognize opportunities. So that's why I can't ever just be like this, like, head honcho CEO, like, do this. No, like if I point the finger, it's because I would do it first, or I can do it myself, you know?
Mhm.
But what is really difficult, though, I'll tell you this, and confidence, this is me getting vulnerable with you.
Yeah.
As we have grown, I've had to hire people that I know nothing about what they do. And that's tough because if there's a problem, my reaction is,
Right.
but what happens if you don't know where the ball fell? It's stressful. If a design is wrong, I can go in and catch it, fix it before the client sees it. Same thing with development, same thing with QA, same thing with sales, da 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 da. I've acquired all these skills. But what about marketing? What about SEO? What about AEO? You know? And so that's the industry's changing so quickly that you have to be a practitioner. Because if you're not, you're desensitized to what's going on in the world.
Mhm.
And that's okay for a year, maybe. But what happens in 5 years where the industry is unrecognizable because you didn't level up with it?
Right.
So that's my dilemma. That's why I'm spending 60 to 30% of my time on any given week on research and building tools.
And for these new marketing roles you've hired, have you found yourself really feeling like it's a good investment of your time to dive deep into what they're doing and learning the process so that you can have that context?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because then I can sell better.
Yep.
Or I can empathize better. So if a team member is complaining that they don't have some resource that they need or a tool or whatever, then it's like, oh, I see.
Yep.
You can't do what you need to do if you don't have what you need.
Yep.
I got you. Let me go solve that problem because you can't do it, or you know what I mean? We collaborate together.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a tough one though.
Yep.
Because I mean, ideally, when you fire yourself and, then you have like, or a director of operations, or you hire a CEO to do your role, that is so magical. Like, if you want to unplug, if you don't want to be connected, but I still love it. I still want to push. I still want to pull. I love this work.
And it's that finding that balance of letting them make mistakes and learn from them, but also still being there as a safety net when it's really critical for clients or whatever the end goal is.
That's so smart. Yeah.
Well,
So,
you touched on this before about mental health, and I
yeah.
would really appreciate if you could speak more to that. This is something I love to bring on episodes when guests are open to talking about it. But yeah, how has your journey with mental health been, and especially in a high intensity role like being a founder of an agency?
Oof. So just to set the table here, maybe it's just my culture or how I was raised, but emotions were not really, like, you just don't talk about them that much. You just kind of suppress as a, I don't want to get into the gender roles or anything like that because that's not applicable. I think anyone can feel an emotion and express it how they feel it. But in my family, the way I was raised, it wasn't like something that we sat down and we talked about our feelings. You know what I mean? So I just suppressed them, or I learned how to cope with them and love my family. Like, there was never issues, but the challenge that happens as a founder is that you don't ask for help, you know? And so as I was scaling the company, I borrowed the problem of scaling and hiring people. And then really quickly, I realized that they don't work for me. I work for them. And the more people you hire, you think, oh, you bring on more people and it's going to make the company grow faster and it's going to be easier on you. Not true. Not true. If you hire the right person and every single person you hire is the right hire, which is not going to happen every time, then yeah, I guess that can happen, but it's not realistic to expect that. So what happened was, I'll get vulnerable with you. I didn't know what my limit was. And I was so ambitious to prove to myself and all of the people that watched me make the decision to go independent that I made the right choice. So it was almost like you go into a weight weightlifting room or like a gym and you go from lifting 25 pounds to 150. And then you realize, oh, I can't lift this, right? It was like
Yeah.
literally like that. And so I took on one really big project that I was not able to take on. And I ended up working like crazy hours. Wake up at 7 in the morning, go to sleep at 4 in the morning, 7 days a week. I did that for months, right? And I learned who I was. I learned that I'm a person who's willing to do that, but I also learned that I'm human. And that ended up leading to anxiety. And then like, I don't know if they were panic attacks. I don't think they were panic attacks. I don't know what they were, but there were times where I was like, oh, I'm very uncomfortable. This is not good. And I don't think it was depression either. It was like this weird mix between like I took on too much and I was completely exhausted. And there was a window of time where it was like really hard to get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did get out of bed, it was really hard to not go back. And the ambition pulled me through. I'm like getting goosebumps thinking about it because it feels like I'm remembering it now like it was yesterday. But it was when people say that people give up right before they break through, I was there. Like it was finished. It was either like one more push or like give up. And that lasted months. It was like every single day was like 5 micro panic attacks every day. And I was like, nope, I'm built different. I can't do this. I went too far to go back. You know? What would the little boy that came from the US, from Cuba to the US, what would he look at me and say, keep going? Or would he say, go back? You've done enough. And I broke through. Like I literally broke through who I was and all of the limits. And then what happened that I didn't think would happen is similar to go into a weight room and you rip the muscle. When the muscle grows, it grows back bigger. And man, when I tell you, I ripped through layers that I didn't even know I had. And when those layers grew back thicker and stronger, the confidence, the trust in myself, the trust in my team, it was unbelievable. And then it was game over. We went from, a couple hundreds of thousands to multi-7-figure a year. And that's kind of how it happened. I broke through. It was painful. It was very painful.
As you said so well, though, that's how growth is.
What about you?
No, I've also had my fair share of going for the 100 pounds weight instead of the gradual 5 weight increments. And what mine looks like takes the form of depression. And this was my first bout with depression. I was only 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
I almost didn't graduate from high school and was locked in my bed for a year and a half.
No way.
So I lost like a year and a half of my life to depression.
Wow.
But I'm actually very grateful that it happened and happened so early on in my life because it taught me so much more about my body and my limits and how to best regulate myself and that things like really prioritizing my aura score and sleep and, working out every day. That's what's going to make me most productive at work and just be able to sustain the trials that come with being an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, I've certainly had my bouts with depression, but I think it's made me a lot stronger today. And I wouldn't have done anything differently if I could have gone back.
You said a word that resonates, and I want to understand what that means for you.
Mm-hmm.
What does regulate mean? Because oftentimes, just to make sure I answer I ask the question correctly, there's this sense of like imbalance being balance when you're ambitious and when you run the size company that you run. So what does calibrating yourself mean? Or what was the word? Sorry.
Regulate.
Regulate. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, what that looks like is understanding that, certain days of the week, there will be 3 punches that come my way from clients or employee issues, and
Mm,
that's to be expected. And when that happens, just ensuring that I'm regulating myself by, like, really making sure I'm treating myself that evening, um, really, prioritizing, "Hey, if I need to move a meeting the next morning around to be able to ensure I get the full night's sleep and have my alone time in the morning to meditate and to really set my day with intention before I get rolling."
yeah.
Just really being intentional about slowing down when needed and kinda slowing down to be able to go fast later
Ah,
in the week. Yep,
that's awesome.
yep.
Wow. Yeah, I get it.
Awesome. Well, this is a final question I like to ask all founders. What's one strongly held belief that you have that you think 99% of other founders would disagree with?
That's such a good question. Why didn't you send that in the brief? I could have
We gotta
prepared.
keep the hot takes real.
Hmm. One of the things that I'm trying to do right now is putting myself out of a job every year. Like, what does that look like for me? And I think it's an uncomfortable place to put yourself because it's like, I don't know. What does that mean? It's like looking at what other competitors are doing. Becoming friends with your competition, learning what they struggle with and being vulnerable about what you struggle with, and making almost like a mastermind group of your competitors and sharing with them that your intention is not to put them out of business, but to put yourself out of business. And then helping each other grow. An example of that, I had a lead come in yesterday, or 2 days ago, and I read the description and I was like, you know what? I had that call with Jacob. I'm gonna send him a message and see if he's open to this and he's the better fit. We're not. I can take on the deal and do a good job. Our team could do it. But I think there's this misunderstanding where it's like this competition thing. No, it's not. There's so much work to go around. Don't just become friends with your competition, but feed them too. Take care of them. So that's something that I don't think is talked about enough. There's so many musicians that do featured hits, and then the music amplifies, and then they touch new markets. That's why you see a lot of American musicians working with Latin American musicians. The billions of views, it's like that's it makes sense. You're cross-pollinating audiences. It's the same thing with your competition. Maybe your competition is not really good at animation, and you sent them a deal, and then they get a deal for some animation work and they pass it over to you. So I think this lack of thought that initially crawls in needs to go. We don't live in that world, or at least I try not to. So I feed my competition.
I love that, yeah. Especially in the agency space where there's, it's so fragmented and there's so many specialties and niches versus just like large tech players where it's a duopoly or, only fixed number of players. It makes sense to share the wealth.
Yeah, and if you think about it, right? Like, so think about this. Will I be respected more by that client because I turned them down and
Right.
then they went to someone else and they had the best possible experience? I think that speaks more than accepting the client and then doing great work still. But I think that's the honorable thing to do,
Yep.
even though if it's not in your best interest,
At least short term. Yep.
at least short term, but long term.
Exactly.
If you're playing the long term game, then none of these short term wins mean anything.
Yep. 100%. Awesome. Well, Will, where can people find out more about you online and more about Zabal?
Yeah, so sabalmedia.co is the name of the company. You can find me anywhere online. You could just look up my name, Wilian Iralzabal, and I'll pop up. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and grabbing the empanadas. Looks like you went through 2 of them. It's good. We'll have this one backstage, and
Yeah.
so great to see you, man.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Of
been a
course.
pleasure.